It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 34, printed in Part B of House Report 118-551. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 34, printed in Part B of House Report number 118-551, offered by Mr. Crenshaw of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1287, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw, and the gentleman from Washington State, opposed, will control 5 minutes each. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to urge my colleagues to support an amendment that would increase the capabilities of small and medium law enforcement agencies close to the border to fight the Mexican drug cartels that are bringing deadly poisons into our country at unprecedented levels. This amendment would prioritize law enforcement organizations within 100 miles of the border that have annual budgets under $200,000 to receive excess defense articles to surveil and interdict drugs and drug traffickers. So here's the problem that we're trying to solve. Cartels have more capabilities, more resources, more weapons, more money than any small border county can possibly deal with. Our law enforcement needs better weapons. They need better surveillance tools in order to stand a fighting chance. It's worth noting some of the concerns that this would create competition for organizations that need things like high water rescue vehicles. I'm from Houston. I know all too well the importance of those assets. But it's also important to note that this does not create that kind of competition, because what's needed for disaster response and recovery is far different than what is needed for counter narcotics and counter drug cartel surveillance and interdiction. During my work as chairman of the task force to combat Mexican drug cartels, I've heard firsthand of the need for equipment by these organizations that my amendment would prioritize. They're on the front lines of the cartel wars, and we need to support them. I urge adoption of my amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from what?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to claim the time in opposition and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I don't have an enormous problem with this amendment. The 1033 program is very controversial, as we'll get into in the amendment that follows, as to how they prioritize the program within its existing parameters. I can understand that that is, debatable going forward, and I'm certain that the border communities that the gentleman described have the needs described, but there are a lot of communities across our country that have needs when it comes to dealing with crime of one kind or another. And the 1033 program provides a wide variety of equipment. So prioritizing one group over another, I'm not sure that it is justified in that, yes, these needs for law enforcement in those areas and those communities are great, but I would have to hear the argument as to why the needs for other communities are not great. It seems like it would be equal across the board. So I would urge opposition to maintain the flexibility for the department to make those decisions based on their own priorities, not on how Congress has directed it. I reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to answer the gentleman's question, the need arises from an exponential rise in the threat from the Mexican drug cartels that have taken operational control of our border and flooded our country with the poisonous fentanyl trafficking. That's the difference between now and the last 10, 20 years. As long as this program has existed, all law enforcement agencies have had access to it. To the extent that they don't have what they need, it's most likely because their local politicians are defunding the police. But it is indeed up to us to actually prioritize policy. The Department of Defense might not understand, because it's not in their purview to understand the needs of domestic border counties. That is not within the purview of the Department of Defense. It is up to us as policymakers to say, look, this is where it needs to be prioritized, because we're the ones who actually talk to constituents and understand the problem. So I would urge the gentleman to perhaps change his mind and support this amendment, because I think it's a good one and timely given the circumstances we find ourselves in.
Gentleman reserves. I
reserve.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The gentleman answered a question that I didn't ask. I don't doubt the need that you described in those communities. The question that I asked was to say, why are other communities' needs not as great, which is a more complicated question. Nor do I disagree that there is a time and a place for Congress to prioritize and say this is more important to us. It just seems to me that there are criminal justice problems out there. And in the communities that have tried to defund the police, by the way, they're not asking for these programs. So you don't need to worry about competing with them, sadly. That is a problem, which I think I agree with the gentleman on, but not a problem in this case. So my only issue is not with the need of the communities that you are prioritizing. It is an issue of, well, how can we say that those needs are greater than needs of other communities that maybe, drug and crime problems are not confined to the border, as I think many, many members can tell you. So that's the prioritization that I am more interested in an answer to how we should balance that. I reserve whatever time I may have left.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to answer that question as well. The reality is, it's often said that in the current border crisis, every state is a border state. Every county is a border county. But that is simply not true. It's simply not true. The fact is that many border counties are more rural, poorer counties that have budgets below $200,000. That's why we set that limit. If they are a wealthy county with plenty of resources, we exclude them from this prioritization. And it is simply true that geographically speaking, you are more likely to be dealing with this threat, to be dealing with traffickers and high-speed chases if you are an actual border county. And that's why we put that provision in there within 100 miles of the border. The fact of the matter is that these counties simply are different from the rest of the counties around the United States. To the extent that other counties have large drug and crime problems, they're usually big cities. They're usually large cities that have plenty of resources that they can draw from, unlike these counties that are, frankly, drowning in the problems that they're dealing with. And I think this can be a bipartisan solution to fix that. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield back as well.
Gentleman yields back the balance. The question